We've been talking about the candid conversation Prince Harry and Meghan had with Oprah last night, including some of the moments that did not air last night. Oprah joins us now to discuss.
For years, one 90-minute television broadcast has followed Prince Harry and Meghan Markle everywhere they go. It defined their entire public image, split two continents, and forced the British monarchy into one of the most uncomfortable positions in its entire modern history. Now, years later, Oprah Winfrey has finally sat down to look back on that unforgettable night. Not with a new bombshell interview on live television, but in a candid retrospective conversation that has reopened old wounds and reignited a debate that never really went away. What she said about her own role in the most talked-about royal interview of the century is turning heads all over again, and it's worth understanding exactly what happened back in 2021 to see why her recent comments are hitting so hard. That original broadcast wasn't just another celebrity sit-down. It arrived at the height of a global pandemic, when audiences were starved for major television events and the royal family was already under intense scrutiny. Within days, it had become a cultural reference point, quoted, parroted, and dissected across continents. To really understand why Oprah's recent remarks are landing the way they are, you have to walk back through how that original night came together in the first place, piece by piece, deal by deal, and see just how carefully constructed the entire spectacle actually was. It's easy to forget, 5 years on, just how unusual it was for a member of the British royal family to sit for an unfiltered, unscripted American television interview at all. For generations, the institution had operated on a very different set of rules, carefully managed statements, limited access, and a strict preference for controlling the narrative through official channels rather than personal confession. Harry and Meghan's decision to bypass that entire system and speak directly to a global audience, through one of the most trusted interviewers on the planet, was itself a kind of rebellion against centuries of royal tradition. That context matters, because it explains why the fallout reached so far beyond typical celebrity gossip and into genuine questions about the monarchy's future. To understand why Oprah's recent reflections matter, you have to go back to where this all began. Oprah Winfrey and Meghan Markle's connection didn't start in a television studio. It started at Windsor Castle in May 2018, when Oprah was one of the invited guests at the royal wedding of Prince Harry and the newly minted Duchess of Sussex. At that point, the two women barely knew each other. They'd only met once before that day. But Oprah's presence at the wedding was itself a headline, a sign that Meghan was bringing her own American star power into an institution that had operated the same way for centuries. In the months and years that followed, Meghan quickly became a fixture of British tabloid coverage, much of it openly hostile. Oprah, watching from across the Atlantic, began using her own media platform to push back. She spoke about Meghan warmly in television appearances, defending her character against a wave of stories she felt were unfair. It wasn't yet a professional relationship. It was closer to public solidarity, from one prominent woman toward another under siege. Two high-profile figures who understood, in very different ways, what it felt like to have your private life picked apart in public. That relationship deepened once Harry and Meghan made their explosive decision, in early 2020, to step back from their duties as senior working royals. They relocated to California, settling not far from where Oprah herself lives. Proximity turned into partnership. Before the year was out, Harry and Oprah were co-producing a documentary series for Apple TV+, focused on mental health, called The Me You Can't See. That collaboration meant the two had already built a genuine working relationship and a real level of mutual trust months before cameras rolled on the interview that would change everything, giving Oprah an unusual level of access that most journalists could only dream of having. None of that came together overnight, and getting that interview to air wasn't simple. Oprah's production company, Harpo Productions, handled negotiations with tight control, reportedly securing strict confidentiality agreements before a single question was written. One notable decision was to keep the project almost entirely in American hands. British royal correspondents, the reporters who had covered the monarchy for decades and who might have pushed back harder on specific claims, were shut out of the process entirely. The interview was built, from the ground up, to reach a global audience through an American lens rather than a British one, which some observers later argued shaped the entire tone of the conversation before a single camera was even switched on. Once word got out that Oprah had landed the interview, American networks moved fast. CBS ultimately won the U.S. broadcast rights, paying a sum reported to be in the range of $7 to $9 million for the special. The network then turned around and sold 30-second commercial slots for roughly $325,000 apiece, more than double the typical primetime rate, and still sold out almost instantly. Neither Harry nor Meghan personally received payment for participating. Oprah made that point clear when the special aired, framing the entire project as a personal platform rather than a paid endorsement. CBS's rights were limited to the United States, so the international rollout became its own drama. A distribution arm connected to Viacom CBS shopped the footage overseas, and after a competitive bidding process, the UK rights landed with ITV for a price north of £1 million. British commentators were furious that an American company was effectively profiting from what they saw as a national institution's private business. That anger only deepened when critics pointed out the interview's timing. It aired while Prince Philip, then 99 years old, was hospitalized and recovering from a serious heart surgery. To many royal watchers, broadcasting a searing critique of the family during that moment felt tone-deaf at best, regardless of how the timing had actually come about or whether it had been deliberately planned that way. None of the backlash stopped the numbers. The special ultimately pulled in more than 60 million viewers worldwide, making it one of the most-watched interviews in television history and a massive financial win for everyone involved in producing and distributing it. Everyone, that is, except the royal family, who were left to manage the fallout in the days and weeks that followed while the rest of the industry celebrated record ratings. Much of the public assumed the interview was filmed somewhere obviously connected to Oprah or to the couple, her backyard, perhaps, or their California home. In reality, filming took place at a private estate belonging to a mutual friend, chosen specifically because it could be locked down. Pandemic-era safety protocols gave the production a built-in excuse to restrict access to the property, which meant paparazzi, other press, and anyone connected to royal security had no idea where filming was even happening until it was already over. The final broadcast that eventually aired ran about 85 minutes, but the actual conversation itself lasted far longer, well over 3 hours of unedited raw footage. Oprah's team spent days afterward deciding what would make the final cut, which meant Oprah herself had enormous control over which parts of that conversation the world would ultimately see, and which parts would never make it to air at all, a level of editorial control that few interview subjects, royal or otherwise, are ever granted. Of everything said across those 3+ hours, one short exchange became the defining image of the entire special. Early in the interview, while Oprah was speaking with Meghan alone, before Harry had joined them, the conversation turned to how Meghan had been instructed to respond to press inquiries about her royal life, essentially staying silent, offering no comment, no matter what was being written about her. Oprah leaned in and asked her directly whether she had chosen that silence herself, or whether it had been forced on her. Meghan didn't hesitate for even a moment. Her answer was 2 words: the latter. That single response detonated online within minutes. Clips of the exchange, along with Meghan's expressions throughout the interview, spread across every major platform, turning into memes, reaction videos, and shorthand references used far beyond anything connected to the royal family. It became, in a sense, the interview's signature moment, a phrase that came to symbolize the entire Sussex break from royal life and their determination to speak on their own terms going forward, referenced years afterward in completely unrelated pop culture contexts. That moment has recently resurfaced in an entirely new context. Years later, Oprah sat down for a retrospective conversation with Vanity Fair, revisiting that exact exchange and explaining, in her own words, why she framed the question the way she did. According to that recent interview, Oprah said she wanted absolute clarity in the moment. She didn't want any ambiguity later about whether Meghan had simply chosen not to talk, or whether she'd actually been instructed to stay silent. She wanted the answer on record in a way that couldn't be reinterpreted afterward by anyone trying to soften or reshape what had actually been said, whether that was a palace spokesperson or a critic revisiting the tape years down the line. That explanation, offered years after the fact, has not gone over quietly. A wave of critics online accused Oprah of revisiting a moment she herself shaped in real time and now recasting it with the benefit of hindsight, essentially rewriting the history of an interview that made her one of the most talked-about broadcasters of the decade. Others pushed back even further, arguing that Oprah's retrospective comments conveniently sidestepped the criticism that had followed her ever since the interview first aired, namely that she never truly challenged Harry and Meghan on the substance of what they were claiming, and that revisiting the moment now, from a comfortable distance, is considerably easier than it would have been to press harder in real time, under pressure, with cameras rolling and millions watching live. Setting the viral moment aside, the interview's substance carried real institutional weight. The most explosive claim came when Meghan described conversations that reportedly took place within the royal family before her son Archie was born, about how dark his skin might be, and how those conversations were tied, in her telling, to questions about his royal title and his security detail. Neither she nor Harry named who had raised those concerns, which left an uncomfortable shadow hanging over the entire family, since virtually anyone could have been implicated in the public's imagination, a silence that fueled speculation for years afterward. Meghan also opened up about a mental health crisis during that same period of her pregnancy, describing suicidal thoughts and explaining that when she sought help through the palace's internal human resources structure, she was reportedly told that receiving that kind of care would look bad for the institution as a whole, a claim that struck many viewers as one of the most damning of the entire broadcast. She also used the platform, in a moment that surprised many longtime royal watchers, to correct years of tabloid narrative, specifically the widely circulated story that she had made Kate Middleton cry over bridesmaid dresses before the royal wedding. Meghan said the opposite had happened, that Kate had made her cry during a stressful pre-wedding moment, and had later apologized with flowers sent to smooth things over, directly contradicting years of reporting that had painted her as the difficult party in that exchange. Perhaps the most quietly controversial claim of the entire special involved the couple's wedding itself. They told Oprah that they had been secretly married by the Archbishop of Canterbury in their own backyard, just 3 days before the public ceremony at Windsor Castle. That claim would later be disputed once official statements clarified that the only legally binding marriage was the one that took place at Windsor in front of the world, leaving the couple to clarify what they had actually meant. When Harry joined the conversation, he added his own grievances, describing being financially cut off by his father, Prince Charles, and going weeks without his father taking his calls after the move to the United States. He also drew a direct, emotional line between the media pressure Meghan was facing and the pressure that had surrounded his mother, Princess Diana, in the years before her death, a comparison that landed hard with viewers who remembered exactly how that story had ended and gave the whole broadcast an added emotional weight. The reaction split almost perfectly along geographic lines. In the United States, much of the public sympathized with Harry and Meghan, viewing them as a couple who had tried to escape a rigid, unsupportive institution. In Britain, opinion swung hard the other way, with large segments of the public treating the interview as an attack on a historic national institution rather than a personal account of hardship. Some viewers on both sides raised a separate concern entirely, that airing deeply personal grievances from a lavish California estate felt jarring at a moment when millions of ordinary families were dealing with pandemic lockdowns and job losses of their own, a contrast that didn't go unnoticed in either country. British media coverage reached a boiling point almost immediately. Television host Piers Morgan famously walked off the set of Good Morning Britain after a heated on-air disagreement about whether he believed Meghan's account of her mental health struggles. The backlash from viewers was immediate and loud enough that he left the show shortly afterward, a moment that became nearly as talked about as the interview itself. Meanwhile, British tabloids launched a coordinated effort to challenge nearly every specific claim made during the broadcast, publishing rebuttal after rebuttal in the days that followed, and keeping the story alive for weeks. In North America, prominent cultural figures rushed to defend Meghan publicly, and the story grew large enough that political figures on both sides of the Atlantic were asked to weigh in, each side handling the moment according to their own political instincts and audiences, turning what began as a celebrity interview into something closer to an international incident. Newspaper front pages on both continents ran with the story for days. Television panels devoted entire segments to dissecting individual sentences from the broadcast, and radio call-in shows filled hours of airtime with listeners debating who deserved more sympathy, the couple or the institution they had just publicly criticized. Buckingham Palace, famous for staying quiet during moments of crisis, waited roughly a day and a half after the UK broadcast before issuing any statement at all. When Queen Elizabeth II's response finally came, it was brief, just 61 words, but it carried enormous weight. It acknowledged that the family took the allegations seriously while noting, in a phrase that instantly became iconic in its own right, that recollections of certain events might vary between the parties involved. The statement made clear that any further discussion of the family's concerns would happen privately, not in public, and not through the press, a deliberate choice to avoid feeding the story any further. Around the same time, reports emerged that the palace was investigating separate allegations that Meghan had bullied members of her own staff during her time as a working royal, a story that shifted at least some public attention back onto her conduct rather than the family's, and that many observers noted came at a suspiciously convenient moment. Days later, in an unexpected twist that added yet another layer to the story, Prince William broke with royal tradition during a public appearance when a reporter asked him directly whether the royal family was racist. He responded on the spot, without missing a beat, that they were very much not, a rare and unscripted moment that suggested just how much tension the interview had created behind palace walls, even as the family maintained its outward composure in every other public appearance that followed. As the dust settled, attention gradually turned toward Oprah's own performance as an interviewer. Journalists and media analysts began pointing out that she rarely pushed back or asked for supporting evidence on some of the interview's most serious claims. Several statements went unchallenged despite factual issues that became apparent shortly after the broadcast aired, when Meghan suggested that royal protocol had been specifically altered to keep Archie from receiving a prince's title and the security that comes with it. Oprah didn't raise the fact that long-standing royal rules, dating back to 1917, already determine when great-grandchildren of a monarch receive that title, rules that would have applied regardless of any private family discussion on the matter. Similarly, the claim about a private backyard waiting 3 days before the public ceremony was publicly clarified after the fact by the Archbishop of Canterbury's office, which confirmed that no legally binding marriage had taken place before the Windsor Castle ceremony itself. And on the anonymous claim about conversations regarding Archie's skin color, critics argued that a tougher interviewer either would have pressed harder for identifying details or been more cautious about airing an allegation of that severity without them on record, given how far the claim traveled once it aired. Oprah has consistently defended her approach, saying her role that day wasn't to cross-examine Harry and Meghan, but to give them room to tell their story honestly and without interruption. It's the same defense she has returned to in her more recent comments, framing her now famous silent or silence question not as a gotcha moment, but as an attempt to get absolute clarity for the historical record. Still, that explanation is exactly what's drawing fresh criticism now, with some viewers arguing that Oprah, of all people, understands the power of hindsight, and that revisiting the moment years later, with the interview's legacy already secured, is an easier position to defend than the softer questioning she actually delivered live on camera back in 2021, when the stakes were still uncertain. For Harry and Meghan, the interview marked the beginning of a new public chapter, but the sustained attention it generated proved difficult to convert into consistent goodwill. Their Netflix docuseries, released roughly a year and a half after the Oprah special, drew enormous initial interest but faded quickly once viewers had absorbed what it had to offer. Not long after, in a separate and equally damaging blow, Spotify ended its podcast agreement with Meghan, and a senior executive at the company publicly criticized the couple's overall business approach in blunt and widely quoted terms that made headlines of their own. Even mainstream entertainment shows and late-night programs took notice of the shifting mood, poking fun at the couple's ongoing tension between demanding privacy and remaining constantly in the public eye, a contradiction that comedians and satirists alike found nearly impossible to resist. In the years since, both Harry and Meghan have tried to reshape their public image through new ventures, including Meghan's lifestyle brand and her cooking and hosting projects, along with Harry's continued philanthropic work through his own foundation. But repeated polling data from multiple independent research firms has consistently shown their popularity sitting at historic lows on both sides of the Atlantic, a sign that the narrative set in motion by that 2021 interview has proven difficult to shake, for better or worse, no matter how many new projects they launch or how much distance they try to put between themselves and that original broadcast. Oprah, for her part, has largely kept her distance from the ongoing media cycle surrounding the couple, choosing not to join their subsequent projects or public appearances. Her recent retrospective comments suggest she still stands by the interview itself, framing it as successful precisely because Harry and Meghan spoke as openly as they did. Whether her fresh explanation of that pivotal silent or silenced question settles the debate or simply adds another chapter to it depends entirely on who you ask. And based on the reaction her comments have already generated online, that debate is clearly far from over, more than 5 years after the original broadcast first aired. It's worth stepping back and looking at this moment within the broader arc of Oprah Winfrey's career, because the Harry and Meghan interview didn't happen in a vacuum. Oprah built her entire reputation on getting subjects to open up in ways no other interviewer could manage, from decades of daytime television to headline-grabbing sit-downs with figures across entertainment, politics, and sports. That reputation is exactly why CBS and the rest of the industry were willing to pay so heavily for exclusive access to Harry and Meghan in the first place. Nobody else could have gotten that level of candor on camera, and nobody else carried the same built-in trust with an audience that size. But that same reputation is also why the criticism stung as much as it did. When a lesser-known journalist fails to challenge a guest's claims, it's treated as a missed opportunity. When Oprah does it, especially on a subject as consequential as the British monarchy, it becomes a referendum on her entire approach to journalism. Some longtime media critics, looking back on her decades-long career, have pointed out that Oprah has never really positioned herself as an investigative journalist in the traditional sense. Her value has always come from empathy, patience, and an ability to make people feel safe enough to say things they might never say elsewhere. That approach worked beautifully for extracting emotional honesty from Harry and Meghan, but it left very little room for the kind of skeptical follow-up that a straight news interview might have demanded. Her recent Vanity Fair retrospective seems to lean into that same identity rather than away from it. Instead of defending herself as a hard-nosed reporter who simply chose not to interrupt, she's framed her choices as intentional, empathetic, and focused on giving her subjects room to be heard. Whether that framing genuinely satisfies her critics or simply reinforces their original complaint all over again is very much up for debate. And the online reaction over the past week suggests plenty of people have already made up their minds one way or the other. What makes this recent chapter so interesting is the timing itself. Oprah didn't need to revisit that interview. There was no new project to promote, no anniversary being marked, no obvious commercial reason to bring it up again after so many years. That she chose to do it anyway, and that her comments generated this much attention, says something about how much cultural weight that original broadcast still carries. 5 years later, people are still parsing every word, still debating whether the palace deserved the criticism it received, and still arguing over whether Oprah herself handled the moment the way a rigorous journalist should have. Very few television interviews from that era have managed to stay this relevant for this long, which is itself a testament to just how deeply that 90-minute conversation cut into the public consciousness. It's also a reminder that these stories rarely stay finished. Every few years, something reopens the wound, a new documentary, a fresh interview, an offhand comment at an unrelated event, and the entire cycle starts again. Oprah's retrospective comments are simply the latest example of that pattern, proof that as long as Harry and Meghan remain public figures and the royal family remains a subject of global fascination, that 2021 interview will keep resurfacing in one form or another. So here's the real question worth sitting with. Was the fallout from that interview mostly the royal family's making, or did the interview itself, and the way it was handled, deepen a rift that might have healed differently under different circumstances? And now that Oprah herself has gone back to revisit that defining moment, does her explanation change how you see the interview? Or does it only confirm what critics have been saying all along? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's coming next.